Good morning, crime community. I'm just here to show another new book. It's called Two-Way Mirror, The Life of Elizabeth Barrett Browning by Fiona Sampson. Let's just see what it says here. The superb biography rescues Elizabeth Barrett Browning's work from the dustbin of Victorian sentimentality to which her poems have been wrongly consigned for the better part of a century. Peeling back the layers of myth, misogyny, and critical dismissal, Fiona Sampson allows us to see a new and extraordinary woman whose crowning book-length poem, Aurora Leigh, traces for the first time in our language the way a woman became a writer. Sampson's engaging, deeply intelligent book, which at last gives Barrett Browning her due, is a profound inquiry, a vindication, and a delight. Mary Dottie, author of What the Grass, Walt Whitman in his life. Fiona Sampson's vivid new biography gives us Elizabeth Barrett Browning's as busy and ambitious rather than a swooning, sleeping beauty. Sampson's biography consciously mirrors her subject's masterpiece, but then biography, she suggests, is itself a mirror that reveals and distorts its subject. Beautifully told, it is a high time for Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Aurora Leigh were once again household names. Francis Wilson, Daily Mail. Two-Way Mirror restores Barrett Browning to her proper place as one of the leading voices of the Victorian era. This book is an empathetic and much-needed reassessment which tells a fascinating story. Lucasta Miller. Sampson's passionate and exciting biography of Elizabeth Barrett Browning is a surprisingly compact volume, a bristling lyric sandwich of philosophy and action. It is also a page-turner. Maria Evans. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. With these words, Elizabeth Barrett Browning had come down to us as a romantic heroine, a reclusive controlled by a domineering father and often overshadowed by her husband, Robert Browning. But behind the melodrama lies a thoroughly modern figure whose extraordinary life is an electrifying study of self-invention. Born in 1806, Barrett Browning lived in an age when women could not attend a university, own property after marriage, or vote. And yet she seized control of her private income, defied chronic illness and disability, became an advocate for the revolutionary Italy of which she eloped, and changed the course of cultural history. Her late-in-life verse novel masterpiece, Aurora Leigh, reveals both the brilliance and originality of her mind, as well as the challenges of being a woman writer in the Victorian era. The feminist icon, highly profile, active with the abolition of slavery, the intentional literary superstar, Barrett Browning, inspires writers as diverse as Emily Dickinson, George Eliot, Rudyard Kipling, Oscar Wilde, and Virginia Woolf. The Two-Way Mirror is the first biography of Barrett Browning in more than 3 decades. With unique access to the poet's abundant correspondence, astute, thoughtful, and wide-ranging guide, Fiona Sampson holds up a mirror to the woman, her art, and art of biography itself. Fiona Sampson is the author of 28 books of poetry and nonfiction, including the critically acclaimed In Search of Mary Shelley, who we know was married to Blythe Shelley. Published in 37 languages, she is the recipient of numerous national and international honors, including a MBE for services in literature, a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, Wordsworth Trust, and English Association. She is the professor emerita of University of Rockhampton and lives in Welsh Border. I don't know how much more I can read of this, but we'll see if we can get into the beginning of it, maybe a little. Elizabeth Barrett Browning's family called her Ba. Throughout her life, Robert Browning took up the habit. For all of its affections, the diminutive is redolent of the way she's been diminished, both personally and poetically in popular accounts. The poet signed herself EBB, and this shorthand is a godsend to researchers. But initials aren't a name, just a slightly diminishing, dehumanizing paralegal formula. So I've chosen the reasonable onlooker's position and call my protagonist Elizabeth from book 2, where she comes of age. Our family members are called by the names her own usage settled on Papa, Treppy, Uncle Sam, Stormy, but not Adelis or Henrietta. In refusing the premise of slavery, I won't accept that people are slaves or can be property. With people in the story are enslaved, and how I refer to them, I use quote marks to indicate contemporary usage of buying and owning without accepting the terms. Frontispiece from within. Understand that life develops from within. My favorite portrait of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, she simultaneously took away and looks back over her shoulder at us. Of course, in one sense, every historical figure does this, glancing over their shoulder towards the future, where we're watching them even while they face away from us into their own time. But Barrett Browning makes the gesture particularly provocative. Her wide sensual mouth dips and rises in a curly bracket, skeptical, even teasing, for her gaze was a directness that seems startling modern, which in an irony, since in its image that has been constructed by thoroughly old-fashioned means, the front piece is the fourth British edition of the best-selling verse novel Aurora Leigh, is an engraving after an ambrotype, which specifically for this purpose. In the afternoon of September 1858, when a shutter falls on the poet's half-smile in a stuffy studio in La Havre, harbor front, photography is understood to be neither artistic nor detailed. Enough for portraiture. It will be another half dozen years before Julia Margaret Cameron starts to produce her famous, markedly pre-Raphaelite images of family and friends, and so the portrait that eventually results from this sitting won't be created by the photographer, but I found her member of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood itself. Dante Gabriel Rossetti is a friend of EBB, is the celebrated celebrity-like to style herself, and of her husband and fellow poet Robert Browning. He's a poet himself. And from its outset, a decade ago, the Brotherhood has placed literature, philosophy, and the book arts, illustration, fine printing, binding, and the heart of its work. The commitment is combined with the personal acquaintance that surely makes Rossetti the safest of hands for the urgent refashioning of Barrett Browning's public image. But his are not to be the only hands her image passes through. First, it's engraved by less stellar craftsman Thomas Oldham Barlow. The artist edits the results. The hair brought a little more down, more over the forehead, and the parting line now left quite so raw, more tone on the forehead, and indeed all over the face. The mouth is considerably in need of correction by adding a line of shadow all along the top of the upper lip. This lessens the curve upwards at the corners. Notes and sketches sprawl over Rossetti's off-print from the engraver's block. It would be easy to jump to a conclusion that the creator of sultry images of his own lovers, dreamy Lizzie Siddall, heavy-lidded Jane Morris, would like to correct the poet's appearance, but far from disparaging her, Rossetti wants his engraver to be more faithful to the photographic portrait where they're both working from, for example, by removing a sort of smile not in the photograph and not the characteristic of the original. He's had plenty of chances to study the original at the Brownings' home, an evening resort where I never feel unhappy. In the 2 years since the hugely successful appearance of Aurora Leigh, Elizabeth's pioneering 9-book Bildungsroman, which is the first to tell the story of a woman becoming a writer. Rossetti had admired her work and become eager to paint her. Initial impressions is unattractive a person as can be well imagined. She looks quite worn out with illness and speaks in the tone of an invalid. As turning to admiring protectiveness, now he replaces the photographer's stock studio furniture with a symbolic writing desk and instructs Barrett to darken their subject's hair and enlarge her signature dark eyes in order to make her look a little younger and less worn out with illness. After all, this portrait's whole purpose is to extinguish what her husband calls certain horrible libels on humanity published as portraits in America, portrayals all too similar to Rossetti's own first impressions. Earlier shipping the photograph of Aurora Leigh's American publishers, Robert had assured them just a shade too urgently that what you receive is the sun's simplest truth without a hair's breadth of retouching. Well, up from Italy to spend summer 1858 with Elizabeth English's family, the Brownings had picked out Le Havre as a halfway meeting point on the very last day of what turned out to be 2 unsatisfactory, tiring months of the Normandy port. Robert's friend, a clever man, to conduct a photographic session with his camera-shy wife, but the results seemed to justify her resistance. Victor Jean Macaire Warnaud and his brother Louis Cyrus Macaire, who shared the waterside studio, whose own renowned technical pioneers, yet the photographic image they were briefly see commercial distribution in North America to be so proudly dominated to the Authors Club of New York by Literature Richard Henward Stoddard as an oddly unclear and genetic image. The poet's publishers, C.S. Francis and Company, do not use it themselves. Look closer through, and all of Robert's insistency, and there isn't a hair's breadth of retouching. The picture turns out to have been clumsily overpainted. In fact, with 2 sentences, his letter contradicts itself, framing Macaire Warnaud as the artist who worked up detail that got lost in making this copy, yet with its brushstrokes hair, torso straight as a ruler, and expressionless face, the naive rendering of work, hardly of the work of a professional, who, apart from Roderick, who had a keen artistic artist, could have a motive for intervention so strongly that it overrules plain sight and common sense like this. We can't be absolutely sure we've caught him red-handed. The great American photographer, Matthew Brady, seems to have been authorized to sell prints of the image Francis and Company received for $3 a pop, though it's hard to believe that he would have retouched so clumsily. But what we do know is that Robert came back an untouched original. In this version that Barlow and Rossetti used, we can see the detail of the copies taken by British photographers Elliott and Fry. In it, the unexpurgated Elizabeth Barrett Browning has a dark shadow of tiredness or pain under her left eye, and the grieving of her hair is difficult to access, but every bit of character is Rossetti's recreation. This real-life woman has dark eyes and arched and brown eyebrows. Her nose is long, so is her upper lip and its sexy overbite. Her face is asymmetric, cover the right side and the left side soulful and focused, cover the left and the right appears amused. In the 21st century, we recognize instantly that Browning's anxiety about her key publicity shot and their need to control the image of the international celebrity that 52-year-old Elizabeth Barrett Browning has become. As readers, we will see with Elizabeth's fictional alter ego, Aurora Leigh, the social book stands above my knowledge, draws me up, yet we also expect a glossy, artful posed author's photo. It's almost as if we need an appeal to embody the mind we realize as we read. In our own post-modern times, the romantic cult of the visible and what can express seems gobbled by its own children, the visibly framed identities that are of social media ourselves. Elizabeth's struggle with her portrait reminds us of this process of nothing new. The irony is that despite being so anxious aware of the ramifications of image making, she's destined to become a notorious object lesson in the how distorted ideas about famous individuals getting established. The Brownings would have been astonished and mortified to see the myth about their private life obscure first her work and eventually even her identity. Let's remind ourselves that Elizabeth Barrett Browning is a pivotal figure, changing the direction of English language poetry and influencing both her contemporaries and subsequent generations of poets and readers. In her lifetime, acknowledged as Britain's greatest ever woman poet, she receives international critical acclaim and attracts a huge readership. Yet within 70 years after her death, popular culture have reduced this figure, whom she died was mourned as a public political heroine in revolutionary Italy, to a swooning poetess in whose little crouch-bound little only a tyrannical father and an ardent poet lover contribute drama. The damage is well done, above all by Rudolph Bessières, author of The Barretts of Wimpole Street, a man whom is probably safe to say that he makes no particular study of how women emerge as writers, though he seems happy to incorporate gossip to gee up this drama. In the 1980s, Lady Anne Holland Martin will recall to the Browning scholar Philip Kelly how, after party for its premiere at the modern Malvern Festival Theater, it felt Bestier's play needed a dramatic impact. During the conversation, those who had lived in the community for generations recalled in vivid terms the handed down memories about Edward Moulton Barrett. The rest is history. 3 film versions of Bessie's 1931 Broadway hit, Norma Sher, Charles Laughton. Yeah, I met both of those people. 1957 remake with Jennifer Jones and John Gielgud. Sir John Gielgud, yeah, I had lunch with him. And the 1982 TV movie with Jane Laporet and Joss Auckland. There were also no fewer than 7 further remakes for television of Bestier's domestic melodrama. By the 1970s, when Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, and John Updike crowded the book charts, the rowing boys of North American literary criticism will go a stage further, maligning Elizabeth Barrett Browning as relevant to the history of literature only through marriage, or worse, as hindering that real writer, her husband. In 1973's Oxford Anthology of English Literature, handsome-paired volumes designed as an authoritative student resource, Lionel Trilling and Harold Bloom pronounce, Miss Barrett becomes an invalid. Still mysterious reasons from 1838 to 1848, when she eloped with the best poet of her age. Her long poet, Aurora Leigh, was much admired by even Ruskin and is very bad. Quite too bad are the famous sonnets of the Portuguese. Through the Browning's married life was reasonably happy. Mrs. Browning's enthusiasm gave her husband much grief, but perhaps the tenaciousness of this is unsurprising. The anthology's editors print just one minor poem of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but then only the other writing by women to feature of its more than 4,500 pages comprises one minor poem, each by Edith Stilwell and Stevie Smith, early 2 by Emily Bronte, and passages by Dorothy Wordsworth, private journals. In total, fewer than 24 pages, or around 0.5% of their canon. Literary revisionist on this scale is tremendous stuff, excluding all of Bronte's novels. Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, George Eliot, and Virginia Woolf can be neither innocent nor accidental, and it illustrates vividly how literary canons are born, not made. Within the continual process of reputation making and remaking of literary history, Elizabeth Barrett Browning remains a bellwether of the rising and stinking stock of women writers. It's probably no coincidence that the melodramatic exploitation of her life story comes to an end in the 1980s and women's writing becomes more widely read, rediscovering Todd half a century earlier when the Barretts of Wimple Street was already a cultural phenomenon. Virginia Woolf, who we went to see Bestier's play, summed up the poets then standing. Passionate lovers in curls and side whiskers, oppressed, defiant, eloping. In this guise, thousands of people must know and love the Brownings, who have never read a line of their poetry, but fate has been kind to Miss Browning as a writer. Nobody reads her, nobody discusses her, nobody troubles to put her in her place. Yet Woolf was herself complicit. She comments, date from the year she published Flush, a biography of her own version of the famous costume drama, written from the point of view of Elizabeth's pet spaniel. Today, we can ignore how central the construction of identity is to Elizabeth Barrett Browning's story, and how this holds true for her life itself as for myth-making that surrounds it. She is a story about how a human writer becomes and what that this book tries to mirror. Elizabeth dramatizes the two-way creation of every writing, self from without and from within, that the life of the body both enables and limits the life of the mind, is the paradox of the thinking self. John Keats' early death, or the 17-year-old poet suicide of Henry Wallace's The Death of Chatterton, are moving because they remind us that the dead poet falls silent. But life imposes its own limits on the writer. For every word Lord Byron or Malcolm Lowry sees in the day and wake in ways in their work celebrates, there is a John Clare or a Primo Levi trying to write experience away. Writers' bodies create resistances, forcing interplay between self and world. Elizabeth Barrett Browning turned 12 in 1818, the year that Frankenstein's creature first found out how to deeply the wearer of the body can be changed by what happens to it. And perhaps it's no accident that he is the creation of another woman writer. And for so many reasons why women may find that their bodies define their lives to the greater extent than do men's, that is purely no surprise if they choose to write about embodiment. But used to be a feminist truism that Rene Descartes had it wrong, and there is no separation between mind and body, yet bodies do disguise, shield, and isolate minds. A woman being whistled as by far scaffolders may be mulling her dystopian novel. The mother in the labor suit may be donning pioneering work or biodiversity. The figure wearing the marigolds may be a leading human rights lawyer. Maybe to spend any time with someone whose body is failing is to understand and recognize the unimpaired selfhood within it as it's both human and humane. So are we ghosts in the curvaceous machine, to borrow from the 20th century British language philosopher Gilbert Ray's formulation, or do we inhabit the body in ways that are inseparable from how we think and feel? Or again, do many Western philosophy courses start with the thought experiment that goes, how do we know what we're not, a brain being simulated in a vat? Because in a way, that's what we dream of, a virtual life in which we experience ourselves as pure will without the resistances of the concrete world. Today, the screen world seems to offer us this ideal existence. And if we turn back 2 centuries, we find Elizabeth Barrett Browning to use the written word in virtual ways to take part in the wider world while remaining bodily at home in her daybed. As she does see herself as a ghost in a machine, her strong-willed thinking self as set within an often frustrating body, and isn't that illness the contemporary ideas of femininity exclude from her much that she longs to do and be? Living in the shadow of mortality from young womanhood onward, she wants urgently to continue to exist after bodily death, but her loved ones to continue to exist too, as both nonconformist Christianity and the spiritualism she explores assure that they will. This separation of mind, whether as soul or ghost, from body is unfashionable in the 21st century West, but it is to fail to understand how Elizabeth and her contemporaries experience embodiment. In the event, the thinking self who speaks in Elizabeth Barrett Browning's work has triumphantly outlived her bodily existence, and how telling it is that fictionalized character of Elizabeth that replaces her in the popular imagination, someone passive and poorly bullied and rescued, barely even a poet, is almost entirely bodily, scarcely a mind at all. I think we're just going to leave it here till tomorrow. It starts talking about Emily is being part Jamaican, which makes her part black. So we'll get in all of that racism on another day.